Sometimes I make plans and everything goes exactly according to my plans. And sometimes I make plans and everything goes horribly wrong. I waited a long time to become a mother. And so when I finally did become pregnant, I started making my plans. At that time, my husband Jeff and I were living in Nicaragua as missionaries. And so my first plan was to come back to the United States to have my baby because I wanted to be comfortable. And Jeff really felt like we were supposed to stay in Nicaragua to have the baby. And so I wrestled and fought quite a bit with God about that one. But finally came to the realization that that was what we were supposed to do. We were supposed to stay there to have the baby because it was a part of his story. The other thing I wanted to do or started making plans for was to have natural birth. I really wanted to have that experience. And so I did everything that I felt like I could to prepare for it. We found somebody who was willing to Skype with us every week to go through childbirth classes, and I ate right and I exercised and I did everything that I felt like I was supposed to do to prepare for that. So the time came closer for the baby to come, and Jeff and I lived in a rural part of Nicaragua. And so if I was gonna have the baby in Nicaragua, at least I was gonna have him in a hospital that resembled a hospital in the States. And so we rented a place down in Managua, which is the capital there. We went down about a week before the baby was due and just kind of waited for him to come. So I went into labor, and we were looking for some specific signs that we had learned about in order to be the signal to go to the hospital. But after more than 24 hours, those signs hadn't come yet. And so we called the doctor, and he said, go ahead and come into the hospital and we'll check you out. So we went in, and he looked at me and he said, the baby is in distress. You're gonna have to have an emergency C-section. And I remember being in pre-op, and I remember just crying, thinking, I'm afraid for my baby. Is he gonna be okay? But also, I felt like everything that I had just planned for just came crashing down. So Lincoln was born, and he was struggling to breathe. He had to be rushed to the NICU, and Jeff went with him. They were afraid for what had happened to his lungs during that process, as well as his heart, because a lot of stress had been put on his heart. And so they gave him medication. And just a little fun fact about my son, the first medicine that he ever received was to help his heart, which was Viagra. So when I finally got to see him later that day, though, I was wheeled into the NICU, and I couldn't even stand up to hold him. So all I could do was touch his little foot because I couldn't stand. And I just kept thinking, this is not the way that this was supposed to be. But I had a tremendous amount of peace about him. God just gave me peace that he was gonna be okay. But I beat myself up. I beat myself up for not being able to do what I had wanted to do, what I had planned to do, what I had so badly wanted to do. But Lincoln did recover, and 4 days later, we were able to take home a perfectly healthy little boy and begin to learn what it meant to be parents, which we're still learning. But then came the process of breastfeeding, which, to be honest, I was really nervous to even say that word from up here because it's not something that you talk about a lot. But it was a real struggle for me, and every time I had to give him a bottle, I thought, what's wrong with me? Why can't my body do this? But I knew in my heart that that way of thinking that wasn't right. So I prayed, I read my Bible, and I was spoken into by a lot of people who really loved me, and I began to realize that I was believing a lie that I wasn't enough. 2 Corinthians 12:9-10 says, each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. So now I am glad to boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ can work through me. That's why I take pleasure in my weaknesses and in the insults, hardships, and persecutions and troubles that I suffer for Christ. For when I am weak, then I am strong. The truth is that alone, I wasn't enough. But with Christ living in me, I am. I am exactly the mom that God created for Lincoln. I had what I needed, and wherever I was lacking, wherever I was weak, God would fill in those gaps through his strength. John 16:33 said, "We will experience hardships in our lives. I have told you all this so that you may have peace in me. Here on earth, you will have many trials and sorrows, but take heart because I have overcome the world." We all will have moments where we feel like we have failed. We feel like we are not enough. We feel like whatever plans we've made go completely wrong. And during those hard times, we have a choice. We can either choose to allow Satan to use those against us, to defeat us and bring us down, or we can choose to allow God to use them for good and for his glory. All throughout that period of time in my life, God took care of us. He put people around us that took care of us. He put an amazing pediatrician that cared for my son. He put doctors and nurses and hospital staff that, even though they didn't speak the same language, they took care of us. He put our fellow missionaries around us to care for us. He healed our son. He healed me, and he helped me to learn that no matter what happened, that I could always trust in him.